We're going to use welfare analysis in this video to evaluate the effects of an import quota in domestic markets. Now we're going to use the market for shirts, and we're going to look at the before and after effects and the change on consumer surplus, producer surplus, license holder surplus, and total surplus after an introduction of an import quota. So initially, as we can see, the world price is below the domestic equilibrium price here. So the world price of shirts is lower, and so without any government restrictions, people would tend to import at this lower price. So this being the equilibrium without any trade. Without trade, this here be the equilibrium with trade, but without any government intervention. Equilibrium with trade, but without government intervention. And now we're going to look at how an introduction of an import quota will actually change this market. So let's just clear this up so that this graph doesn't get too messy. So, but we now realize we've noted that the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity without trade is here, without international competitors is here, and with international trade is here. And so at this price, what we talked about previously is that the quantity supplied domestically is at QS. And the quantity demanded is here at QD. So at this world price, producers domestically aren't willing to supply that much because of their production costs or because of whatever efficiency reasons. They aren't able to supply at this demand here. So as demand exceeds supply, we can see that to make up for this shortage, suppliers would import. However, if the government introduces import quotas, this would mean that the amount of imports would decrease. So let's assume that the government has introduced this import quota of, say, around this much. We will see that the import, or the amount imported, would actually decrease from QD and QS, the distance between QD and QS, to this new point here. However, what this also suggests is that because there is an import quota, license holders are actually able to bump up their price. So we're just going to look at this magnitude here and move it up so that demand and supply meets at the same magnitude there. So as a result, what we will see is that because there is still an excess in demand to supply, that means domestic producers who are able to produce at a lower cost than this demand line would then enter the market. So domestic sellers of the good are now better off with this import quota. So now this is domestic supply with quota. So this supply line is actually pretty strange now. It goes like this, and it will be shown in pink, like that. Forgive the messiness, but it goes a bit like that. Okay, so here, domestic suppliers are willing to supply at this line, the original domestic supply line. Then we have the imports, being the difference between QS and Q, this new import at the, let's just call this QI, being the quantity we are able to import, and then the domestic supplier would continue as those who are willing to supply at that price will supply at that price. So the price with the quota, now that there is a quota, has actually increased because there is a limited amount people can actually, or producers can actually purchase overseas, and so as a result the price of inputs would actually increase. So as a result, this is the world price. The world price with imports, with quotas, with import quotas. Right. So what this suggests is that, as we can see, because the quantity available to import is only now this much, they've actually bumped up the price. And so this magnitude here is the same as this magnitude there. They actually just increase the price. And so that's the amount that we are able to import. So we're no longer able to import the difference between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. We're only able to import the difference here. Alright. With this in mind, we're just going to label all these different triangles, and we're going to look at demand and supply. We're going to use welfare analysis to see the before, after, and the change in welfare in this society. So we have A, B, C. This little triangle here is D, E. This little triangle here is F, and again this is G and H. Okay, so before this introduction of the import quota, we can see that the consumer surplus is anything that consumers are willing to supply above the domestic, above the world price line. So the domestic demand line, anything along the domestic demand line which is above the world price line. So that is given by A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F and plus G. Producer surplus would only be H here, because producers, that represents the number of producers who are willing to supply at a cost lower than the world price. So H is producer surplus. The license holder surplus, because there are no import quotas in this market, will be 0. The total surplus, we just add consumer surplus and producer surplus up together, and we get A plus B plus C plus D plus E, F, G, and H. However, after we have an import quota, we can see that the equilibrium price is actually increased to this line here. So the actual price is actually denoted by this orange line here. And so what this represents is that consumer surplus after the quota would only be anything that we are willing to purchase above the new quota price, or the new world price with import quotas, which is A plus B. So this large triangle here is A plus B. And as a result, we can see that the change would be negative C, negative D, negative E, negative F, and negative G. The producer surplus, because that the world price has increased, has also increased from H to H plus C. So then there's this new world price, and therefore that introduces or encourages more producers domestically to supply that, because of this increase in world price given this import quota. So afterwards, we can see that producer surplus would be H plus C, and the change would in fact be plus C. The license holder surplus, as we can see, is those who now have the license to import. This is very similar to tariffs. Instead, tariffs go to the government. This goes to the government. This goes to license holders, and so it is given by the amount they can import now, which is given by this distance here, and multiplied by the markup in price, which is that distance there. And as we can see, this is denoted by the shaded region, which is also E plus F. So as a result, the change in license holder surplus is E plus F, this little rectangle there. So if we add all this up, we can get total surplus to be A plus B plus C plus E plus F plus H. And now the change, however, would be D and G. So we lose D and G overall. So that would be negative D minus G. So what this suggests is that negative D, negative G is the deadweight loss, or the measure of inefficiency in this economy if import quotas are introduced. And so D represents, or the deadweight loss of D represents the excess of resources utilized in this area of comparative cost disadvantage, so excess of resources used by producers who shouldn't actually be producing in this economy or in this market because they have comparative cost disadvantage. They are inefficiently allocating their resources. And we have G here. And that deadweight loss, or measure of inefficiency, represents the excess consumers need to pay. So they've actually paid that much more, and those people along this demand line, which is going to use in purple, this bit here, they actually can't afford to purchase shirts now, since the world price has increased given import quotas have been introduced. So the people along this line who are only willing to purchase shirts at only that much above the world price now won't be able to produce shirts, and that represents a loss of consumer satisfaction. So overall, with import quotas, our material living standards are worse off by D and G. So with trade liberalization and this abolition of import quotas, it suggests that consumers and producers, or total society, the entire economy would gain by D and G, and therefore living standards will be maximized, and also opportunity cost in resource allocation would be minimized, in that there will not be an excess in resources used in this area of comparative disadvantage.